theories of early man. It leaves in ruins the notion that all early fossils can be arranged in an orderly sequence of evolutionary change. Richard Leakey's father, Louis Leakey, was very upset when this particular fossil was found, because Richard Leakey said that Australopithecus, his find that his father had made, did not belong in the lineage of man, that this creature was one of the best members that had been found that did belong in the lineage of man. As you can see, the skull looks very much like you and I. It has a smaller cranial capacity, but they're not sure whether or not it was a child. If it was, then of course it would have a smaller cranial capacity. And John Harris from the Natural Museum of Kenya, in the same strata that this skull was found human leg bones. And so very likely this could have been just a simply small human being. Nevertheless, from this particular skull, Richard Leakey had an artist reconstruct what he felt this creature looked like in the past. And once again, you'll see the conjecture. The hair, the nose, the shape of the face, and the skin color are not based on any factual observable evidence, but on total speculation. As well, Richard Leakey had a Hollywood artist make up a mask to attempt to explain what Homo habilis looked like in the past. And here on the front of Time magazine, an article entitled How Man Became Man, we see Richard Leakey sitting beside Homo habilis, which is supposed to have died 2.8 million years ago, and there he is today, wearing a Hollywood mask. Obviously, once again, we've used tremendous speculation to try to prove a point that our ancestors are primitive in the past. If the skull is like we are today, if human leg bones have been found in these same stratas where Homo habilis was found, certainly this does not prove whatsoever that this creature belongs in the lineage of man. And we could remove this one as well from our chart and go on to the next two in the chart here, which belong to the category called Homo erectus. We are shown entire skulls of Homo erectus. Here in the middle is a picture showing the skull and the facial features of this so-called member of the lineage of man. But I want to point out to you that they have never found an entire skull. Once again, an artist's reconstruction of what they believe our ancestors have looked like in the past. The two members which make up Homo erectus are Java man and Peking man. First of all, let's look at Java man. In the late 1800s, a German professor by the name of Ernest Haeckel, who was a very strong supporter of Charles Darwin, suggested that the link between ape and humans would likely be found somewhere either in Africa or southern Asia. And he had an artist actually draw a picture of what he believed this link would look like, and he called it Pithecanthropus alalis. His graduate student, a man by the name of Eugene Dubois, in 1891 went to Asia and found the first year a skull cap, which he said belonged to this missing link. It was a gibbon skull cap. The following year, he went back, 1892, and 50 feet away, he found a human leg bone and 3 molar teeth, and he put the human leg bone together with the gibbon or ape skull cap and explained to the world that he had found this missing link that everyone had been looking for. He hid his fossils away. Before he died, he admitted what he had done. He'd placed the ape-like skull cap with the human leg bones, and that he really did not have a credible ape-man link whatsoever. And yet today, many people still claim that Java man is a credible ape-human link between apes and humans. And then we have Peking man. And here we have entire reconstructions of Peking man. You can see the paintings of them and their primitive poses, hunting positions, and striking stones to make fire. In the 1920s, there were some fragments of jaws and skulls that were found at the site of lime burning pits in China. And once again, it was proclaimed to the world that they had found the missing link. Other scientists examined these fragments and said they belonged to gibbons, ape-like creatures. At the same location, human remains were also found. And so many people believe that at this lime burning pit, there were humans who were actually killing gibbons and and breaking their skulls and using the brains as a delicacy for food. No way is there any conclusive evidence that these fossil fragments that they found there were part ape, part human creatures that should belong in the lineage of man. And in spite of the pictures or the paintings that we have of Peking man, they are not credible and certainly do not deserve a position in this so-called lineage of ape to man. Well, there have been many other proposed links. Of course, Neanderthal man, for years, was suggested to be a primitive brute-like creature that preceded modern man. We saw models in various museums. They were all bent over, brute-like creatures with big brows, hairy creatures wearing various kinds of skins. It was determined that Neanderthal man was like you and I are today, only it had a larger cranial capacity, and that it simply suffered from bone deficiency or disease called rickets, and that's why the swollen joints. And Neanderthal man does not deserve a place in the lineage between apes and humans. Or Cro-Magnon man, which is another proposed connection between lower forms of consciousness and modern man. Cro-Magnon man is like you and I, and many paleoanthropologists say that if you dressed him up in clothes like we wear today, he would look exactly like you and I. But it's been suggested that he was on his way to advancing to modern humans because of the primitive cave drawings and artwork which we have seen in the past. But once again, there's other evidence which indicates that Cro-Magnon man may have not been as primitive as what we've been told. Here's an article taken out of a Bible and Science newsletter which tells us that Cro-Magnon man in the past could have been very advanced. It suggests that on some inscriptions that were found in caves in France, that the inscriptions show that these people of the past appeared to have been dressed in pantsuits with short sleeves and boots. In fact, it looks like you and I today. It says that these particular inscriptions are stored away in a museum in France so that people don't have the option to go and look at them because they would be too revealing, because they conflict or contrast too much with the conventional theory of evolution. Well, as we're going to see later, in the past, the biblical account suggests that ancient man was not primitive, but was highly advanced, and such information certainly supports this biblical view. Or we have Nebraska man, which for years was claimed to be an ape-man creature. Nebraska man was based on a single tooth that was found in Nebraska in the early 1920s, and Nebraska man, Nebraska woman were reconstructed from this particular tooth. Later, it was determined that this tooth was from an extinct pig. Or Piltdown man, proposed by Charles Dawson as a credible link in 1912 in England. A skull was found in a quarry near Charles Dawson's home, and the following year, in the same location, there was a jaw which he put together with the skull, and the jaw looked like an ape-like creature. He believed that this jaw and the skull went together from the same being and were part ape and part human. Later it was determined that the jaw was an ape jaw and the teeth had been filed to look human-like, and the whole thing was a hoax or a fraud. And so Piltdown man, which for many years was accepted as a credible ape-man link, is no longer, of course, used. We can look at some current statements. Time magazine, November 7th, 1977, which we have looked at, the front cover of this particular article. On page 41 says, "Still doubts about the sequence of man's emergence remain. Scientists can see that their most cherished theories are based on embarrassingly few fossil fragments, and that huge gaps exist in the fossil records." Richard Leakey, when he was interviewed in the Regina Leader-Post a number of years ago, stated, "Until we find complete skeletons of ape-men, creatures, we have to rely upon inspirational guess." And the front cover of Discover magazine, September 1986, it states, "We no longer know who gave rise to whom or from whom wherever we came." It says there's no conclusive evidence whatsoever that we have an exact lineage of ape-men creatures that can be proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. So from the physical observable evidence, there indeed is much lacking to prove this concept that ape creatures have evolved and developed into modern humans. There has never been found to this point a credible link between. They're not sure whether or not it was a child. If it was, then of course it would have a smaller cranial capacity. And John Harris from the Natural Museum of Kenya, in the same strata that this skull was found human leg bones. And so very likely this could have been just that Australopithecus, his find that his father had made, did not belong in the lineage of man, that this creature was one of the best members that had been found that did belong in the lineage of man. As you can see, the skull looks very much like you and I. It has a smaller cranial capacity, but that is simply a small human being. Nevertheless, from this particular skull, Richard Leakey had an artist reconstruct what he felt this creature looked like in the past. And once again, you'll see the conjecture. The hair, the nose, the shape of the face, and the skin color are not based on any theories of early man. It leaves in ruins the notion that all early fossils can be arranged in an orderly sequence of evolutionary change. Richard Leakey's father, Louis Leakey, was very upset when this particular fossil was found, because Richard Leakey said factual observable evidence, but on total speculation. As well, Richard Leakey had a Hollywood artist make up a mask to attempt to explain what Homo habilis looked like in the past. And here on the front of Time magazine, an article entitled "How Man Became Man